Yeah.
Oh, it says live on YouTube now.
Really?
Yeah.
What says live on YouTube?
Oh,
Zoom does.
Zoom on YouTube. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think it's working maybe on my personal account. I couldn't get it to work on the Sandbox one.
Internet thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nope. It says live on YouTube now.
Really?
Mine says that too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we are live on YouTube.
On your YouTube channel?
On my personal YouTube channel.
Okay.
So let me give you the link and you can post it. We can try this. Like we can maybe, there must be a way to cross post it to Facebook.
Yeah, it's harder to like.
Oh, there we are. Should we like?
On my
should we wait a second and see if it boots us off YouTube?
Yeah.
You know, in like a minute.
Make sure you mute the YouTube video if you guys are looking at it.
Should I just drop this link on Facebook right now?
Yeah, I guess so. And if it really doesn't work, then
yeah,
figure it out.
Ian, did you log in on Chrome when you did your Zoom thing, or?
No, I logged in through the app.
I think that might have been what I did wrong.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I was just doing it on. If this doesn't work, I'll try it. I'll do it on the app. Let's see. And I think my internet is good. Yeah, the weird thing about large scale Zoom hangs is it's like everyone kind of has to be in on the same conversation. Which is like sometimes difficult to coordinate like a 10-way equally interesting conversation. That's like a
yeah. It's not. I mean, it's cool. It's awesome, but it's definitely not. It doesn't replace actual human.
All right, I just posted it.
Okay.
Cool.
It would be harder to have a 10-way conversation though if we didn't all have this one thing in common between like pretty much everybody with the internet right now.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a great equalizer.
The 3 people might be us.
Oh yeah, that's probably you guys. I'm not on.
Okay. So Amphion just posted on their website that they're temporarily like making the grant unavailable, and everyone should check back in April.
Yikes!
I think they're gonna like change the requirements.
Make it more stringent, or
I think to like make it more about what's happening right now.
okay.
Hi, everybody who just joined. Sorry for the technical difficulties. This is just yet another reason why we want things to go back to the way they used to be. I think that every single person on the planet is live streaming something right now. So we just keep getting booted off Facebook. So sorry about that.
Well, let's hang out for 2 minutes and see if it kicks us off before we really jump into it. And then we'll be at 5 minutes.
I think it might just be my optimism, but I think this is going to work. I think YouTube is going to go on.
Woo!
Thanks for following us over to YouTube, everyone.
Yeah, anybody who's joining on YouTube from Facebook, thank you, and sorry.
Is there a way for people to like write things to us on YouTube now too, or?
There is, yeah. There should be, right, Ian?
Yeah, they can leave comments.
Absolutely, yes.
How bad is the lag time?
It's there. It's a thing.
Okay, all right. we'll try not to move too fast and skip a topic that someone asks a question about or something.
Yeah. All right. Well, should we jump into it since we're already 27 minutes behind schedule? Sorry again, everybody.
I'm Victor.
So what we were saying before is this live session, third time's the charm. This live session is in lieu of a live reading session that we were going to have in our studio this past Wednesday. We did a call for scores, and we got 80 scores, 80, which is super cool. And as we were going to plan to read all the pieces, the situation with the crisis in New York was escalating and all non-essential businesses had to stay home. And we felt like that included us. So we postponed that event for a later time. But instead, we're going to have this conversation about percussion composition and some things that have come up for us as we were looking through all the pieces that were submitted to us. And also, we're going to be taking some questions. Some composers have written to us with some questions about some music that they've written and just some general questions about writing for percussion in general. And we're also going to be taking questions from all of you watching now. And you can write them in the comments section on YouTube, not on Facebook, on YouTube, since that's where we are now. So let's jump into it. Our first question is from Ted Babcock, and he is asking, he's a composer, also a percussionist who went to Curtis. And he's asking what we are most looking forward to in the next few years of music making as a group. I know right now it's hard to think so far ahead, but I thought it might be nice to think about the positive new trends in percussion and new music as a whole. Great question. I'll take a first stab at it. I think that right now, one of the things that we're looking forward to in the future now is to play some of the music that we were going to play during this time, which has been, unfortunately, a lot of those events have been postponed. So that's sort of a funny way of just saying that for us, I think we're really excited to just keep doing a lot of what we're doing now, which is working with composers, commissioning new music, and also trying to do as much as we can to kind of help pass the torch with percussion chamber music. A big thing that we do is the percussion NYU Sandbox Percussion Seminar, which is still on this year. In August, we're going to be having a seminar at NYU. So that is another big thing that we're really excited to keep doing. And those are two of the biggest things for us in our mission. Realizing new pieces for percussion quartet and also education. Somebody else want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think this obviously is such a weird and strange time for everyone. We, like Victor was saying, the four of us have been unable to get together, which is a weird thing because we are normally together all the time. But I'm trying to find whatever silver lining I possibly can. Johnny was just talking about this earlier today when we were talking about something else, but this is such an amazing time because we have all of this free time, this unscheduled time that we normally never have. So when someone asks me to listen to this piece or check out this video, or maybe I want to listen to some Beethoven string quartets or something like that, something that I might not always have time to do in my normal hectic life, I'm finding a lot of fun and joy in the ability to do stuff like that right now. So I'm trying to figure out ways to stay stimulated and stay interested, even though, of course, we're not doing all the things that we're normally doing.
Yeah, I like this question too, thinking about moving forward and positive trends in percussion. And I'm so curious, like, I mean, everyone's talking about getting back to normal and back to, the way things were, but I'm also really curious about like what actually is going to change for the better as a result. Like now we're getting better at live streaming things and we're getting better. I mean, we're like on the phone every day talking about stuff that we want to be doing, and who knows how many things are actually always going to be different, but that's actually kind of a good thing in a way. Like, I think I'm learning a lot about like what is most important to me right now. It's like the things that I cannot help but find some way to do. It's a lot of playing drum pad. It's a lot of trying to like listen to music that I find really inspiring. And it's a lot of reaching out to the people who are important to me, finding time to connect with them somehow. And even to people who maybe I fell out of touch with. I think that now is actually a better time than most to do that. When things are going totally normally, it's hard to reach out to someone who you haven't spoken to in a while and say, oh, hey, how are you doing? But now you have every reason to do that. And you have this kind of common thread, like you have something in common with everybody right now. There's this whole situation that we're all kind of going through together. And so there's never been an easier or more appropriate time to make a personal connection from a distance. But I think that's actually something really exciting.
Well, I know we got a lot of composers hanging out right now, so maybe let's jump into it. Let's get a little more into the weeds. So I think we so as Victor said, we didn't have a chance to play through all of these pieces that were sent to us yet, but we did have a chance to look through all of the scores, and I think a bunch of things that we see all the time when people are writing for percussion for the first time often comes up. We found a lot of things were similar from piece to piece to piece, and so we thought we'd kind of go through things. We did get a bunch of questions sent to us. We're going to try to address all of those, and again, if you have any as we're talking, please just put them in the comment feed and we'll get to them. I think that the overarching thing that we want to say, and this applies to every part of your composition, from the actual music that you're writing to how you present it on the page, how you show it to us. The overarching thing that we want to talk about is just remembering to consider every aspect and put weight on every aspect of the presentation of your piece. I think what we often find is that people spend a ton of time on the actual artistry of what they're doing, and maybe the amount of time they spend on the artistry versus the amount of time they spend on laying it out and notating it on a page are vastly different. But we, as the performers, often feel that these things are connected, and that no matter how beautiful or inventive or imaginative a piece of music is, if the composer doesn't help give the performers the tools that they need to play the piece, it can result in a performance that is not as good as you want it to be. So that's just kind of like the overarching thing that I think we're gonna try to talk about.
Yeah, and I might add one more thing about getting to see all this music that came in and look through these scores. Talk about an inspiration, right? I mean, getting to see how much great music really does exist out there and is being written. I was getting excited just looking at these scores, imagining what they might sound like if we were to play them. So thanks again to everybody who submitted something. It actually really brightened my days here. So what do we want to start off with? Maybe a little bit of, we're trying to break this up into, there's things that help us before we even get into the room and set it up. And then there are things that help us while we're practicing it. And then there are things that help us while we're performing it. And so maybe we'll go kind of chronologically through.
Kind of three categories like that.
Yeah. Should we say this question by Alvin?
Yeah.
All right, so Alvin asks, what are some of the aspects you would as the performer, or we would as composers, consider for the setup when your part involves more than one instrument? So this is kind of a question about like, just percussion could be any number of things, right? Like sometimes it's just a marimba, but sometimes it's a dozen different instruments. And we don't discriminate. We love playing one just as much as the other. But obviously, if you say you're writing for marimba, it makes our lives really easy in a sense that we know exactly what it is. And if you say you're writing for these 12 instruments, now we're talking about kind of a whole list of criteria that might be worth addressing. Terry, you want to start us off on that? or not.
I think you're muted. Maybe not. That's okay. One of us can jump in. No, it's okay.
Got it. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Sorry, guys.
It's okay.
Okay, cool. Yeah, totally. So I don't know. I was thinking about this a little bit, and we obviously in the scores we got like a ton of different pieces. And so I think the takeaway that I was kind of feeling was that, like Ian said, I was really responding when I could tell that like this person or this composer really thought exactly kind of like how would we as the players do what's here? Like how would we kind of pull it off? And sometimes that's super specific. Like sometimes we have had composers like totally set up a piece and we go to their house and they have like a setup built in their little apartment. And they have like a homemade version of whatever piece it is. And that's cool. Like, I think that's like one version of it. I don't think you necessarily have to do that, but I think we sort of respond to kind of the feeling that someone has really taken a lot of care into figuring out maybe how these things are going to happen, sort of like in terms of the setup. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers the question, but.
What's an example of that?
Well, yeah, sure. So one of our good friends, this guy, Thomas Koch, he's written a lot of music before. And a few years ago, I guess, actually the piece we just released on our album, this piece, not only that one, but that one and that too, we were doing the premiere and we were doing it in California at his house, or we were staying at his house, but we were doing the premiere out there. And we like kind of got to his studio and he had these like totally like makeshift setups of the piece, like in his writing studio. And like, I think even some of them were not like he wrote for a bunch of instruments, but his setup was like instruments he found in his house. Like they weren't the correct things, you know? I feel like I might be remembering this wrong, but I feel like he had like a table with like bottles and stuff on it, even though that wasn't in this particular piece. He was like using that to figure out what the kind of physical challenges were going to be in the piece. And I had no idea. We didn't know he was doing that, but like when he did that or when we saw it, we were like, oh man, like that's why so much of this music feels really cool and feels really good to play, you know? That's when things sort of physically feel right. I think it's a lot of the time because someone maybe spent the time to kind of lay the things out and figure out how it would feel, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing to point out about Thomas is he's not a percussionist, right? So you don't have to be a world-class percussion player to be able to do this kind of thing. I don't think Thomas was sitting there with the setups for his pieces and able to play through every part at tempo or anything like that. But I do think he sat there and could probably play almost every measure of the piece at like 1/20th tempo or something like that, an incredibly slow tempo, just like Terry's saying, to try to figure out the physicality of what you're doing. So to get back to the to the question that Alvin asked, if you're thinking about writing a part for somebody that uses multiple instruments, I think it's essential that you've spent some time thinking about how those instruments are going to be set up and how you're going to sort of manage the logistics of playing all of them. If you have a snare drum and a triangle and a marimba, all three of those use very different implements to hit them and make the best sound on them. And some of them, if you use the triangle beater on the marimba, you might break it, you know? So you have to have spent a little bit of time figuring out how these things are going to be set up, what kind of sticks people are going to have to hold to hit all of these things. And you might not come up with the best solutions. The percussionist might come up with better solutions later or change what you had in mind. That's fine. But if you haven't gone through the process of thinking about that, then it's likely that the percussionist is going to go through it, perhaps decide that some of the stuff you wrote was impossible and maybe get you to change it or just change it on their own to something that you didn't actually want them to change it to. And I think it builds a lot more trust with your player if you go through as much of that part of the process as you are able to before you even send them the music.
Right. So we got some questions about like setup diagrams. Like, and I know a lot of the scores we looked at had diagrams in them. How do you guys feel about diagrams? Where do we stand on that?
Love them.
I guess I feel the same way as what I just said. Like, even if you don't know exactly how to set them up, you putting a diagram in the score, it at least gives the percussionist or the percussion group a place to start their journey with the piece with. If we get a score with nothing in it, you have to remember that to be a percussionist, there's often many steps that go into getting ready to play a piece. It's not like a string quartet where you send them the music and likely they can all put it on their music stand, pick up their instruments and just start playing, right? For us, if there's no diagram, if we're being asked to tune 37 pieces of metal to specific pitches, and the score was formatted in such a way that everyone had to print out and cut out their part and paste it on a poster board, there's like a week of work involved before we can even start playing the piece. And so if there's any part of that that the composer can help the performer just sort of arrive at the correct answer a little faster, that is very, very much appreciated. So I think drawing a diagram, taking a picture, whatever you're able to do just to get them started is a great thing.
Cool.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about this, the four of us earlier, just about what our own individual processes for learning a new piece. And I feel like for me, I mean, everybody goes about it differently, but for me, I think that from the moment I open up the score and start just looking at what instruments I'm going to be playing, like the hopeful successful performance that I have starts right there, you know. Like maybe 90% of the work is done in your practice room, but it's almost like you're picking good stickings right in the beginning to set yourself up for success, right? So for me, like if I know that I need to set my multi-percussion setup in a certain way to be able to successfully execute the piece, then I want to make sure that I spend a good amount of time really thinking about that. And having the composer maybe also be thinking about that before you even do is even better. So it's just a way to, you know, if I learn good stickings before I actually start learning the piece, if I set up good stickings before I start learning the piece, my chances of playing it well they will be better.
Yeah, there were a bunch of pieces I got to look at that actually felt like they really set me up for success. And when you see that, it really inspires you to bring everything you can to make this thing work. And when I see that, yeah, the composer has written a program note that's really detailed and the setup diagram that is like spot on, I'm like, let's get in there, you know, and let's like just start learning this thing. And I feel really inspired by the work that they've put in, and they did their job so well as the composer. You all did your job so well as composers that I then want to do my best job as a performer in learning those notes, getting them to sound as beautiful as possible, really executing. And kind of along these lines, I know it might sound terrible, but MIDI recordings I actually find really helpful when I'm getting ready as well. If I see one, like, you know, sometimes the sounds might be a little rough or things like that. And of course, the better they are, the easier it is for us to get the idea. But that's a really great starting point for me. I find is I can just kind of get it in my ear and follow along. And some people might feel differently. I don't know. How do you guys feel about MIDI recordings?
Love them.
All right.
I love everything. Yeah, I mean, I think they're definitely helpful. Obviously, they exist in so many different qualities, right? And I think some composers are even reticent to send the MIDI to the performers because they think the sounds sound so much unlike what the actual sounds of the instruments are going to be like. And with percussion, obviously, that is often true, because if the composer is creating a new instrument or making a prepared instrument or a new extended technique, it's going to be hard to find a MIDI that sounds like that. I guess I would say anything is better than nothing. So anything that you can give a performer to start to give them an idea of what you want the piece to sound like in terms of tempo and the general orchestration of the piece, anything like that is super helpful. But I also think that there are, I mean, it depends on how nerdy and specific you want to get with it, but there definitely are ways to improve the quality of the MIDI. Like we work with a few composers who, when they're inventing new instruments or creating new ways to make sound in instruments, the first thing they'll do is come over to our studio and spend a lot of time, many hours, sampling every single note and dynamic and type of stroke on a new thing. Like we were working on this piece the other day for this interesting technique of bowing mallet instruments, where we bowed them very, very quickly. We got these very quick, short staccato bow sounds, something we had never really done before. And then you muted the note as soon as you played it. So it's like this very quick sort of technique. Obviously, Sibelius or whatever program he was using did not have a sound for that. So we spent hours recording every single note on the vibraphone, every dynamic, every duration of note. And then he put that into his program. And then when he was composing, he was actually able to hear exactly what this piece sounded like with those real sounds. And so not only was it helpful to us when he sent it to us because we couldn't play it at tempo right when we got it, but we could hear what it sounded like with the MIDI. I think it was really helpful for him too, because when he was composing, he was able to play back in real time exactly what this new sound that he was dreaming up sounded like.
Yeah, I don't know like how hard or how easy it is for people to make like the MIDI. I guess I've always thought that it wasn't like a super difficult thing to do. Like if you're writing in a software, it's kind of there, right? Actual question. I don't know.
Not rhetorical. Well,
I know it's not that easy when you're talking about sounds that are more complicated than the built-in ones in the program.
Right.
The process Andy goes through is like,
it's intense.
Yeah,
insane.
Sure. But anyway, I think like we were just feeling that like some of the pieces we got like had MIDI with them, and it was like, you know, right away really easy for us to get a sense for the piece. You know, we right away know kind of how long the piece is going to be, which is super helpful for us. And I think, you know, we like sort of generally can get a sense for what's in there really quickly, which is cool. That's another one of those things like Johnny and Ian were both saying, like anything that can kind of like get us to playing quicker is cool for us, I think.
I just got a text from Jerome.
Oh yeah.
Jerome Begin. I don't know if he's on here right now. There he is.
Yeah.
What's up, Jerome?
He just dropped a comment.
Thank you, Cerrone.
Yeah, he's right. So anyway, I was bringing up Jerome. I was bringing up Jerome because he wrote us this piece called Wilderness that we played with a dance company, Brian Brooks Dance Company, and that it was like an evening length piece, hour plus of music for almost entirely for rototoms. Amazing piece, and the whole piece had a MIDI. He kind of constructed this MIDI, and that was super helpful for me in learning the piece, just because it was like highly rhythmic and hockety and composite rhythms that were being passed throughout the four of us. So having that MIDI was super helpful.
In that particular situation, I feel like we practiced a lot with it too, right? I don't know, there's something about that piece where we like weren't in the same room for some of the time when we needed to practice, so we were all like playing with the MIDI to like kind of take the place of the three other people or something. I don't know, I remember something about that being really helpful.
This is something that we do a lot. You know, if it's a piece, it depends on the type of piece. If it's a piece that doesn't have a lot of tempo fluctuation, if it kind of stays at one speed for extended sections, we'll either take a MIDI from a composer, or sometimes we'll just create one on our own to mimic what it would feel like if you were sitting in the ensemble and everyone was playing exactly right. So we will practice these very dense, rhythmic, hocketed pieces just on our own, listening to a MIDI that is all three of the other people's parts playing perfectly, but not our part. And then our idea is kind of, if you can execute your part well enough to stay with that track, then you're sort of ready to step into rehearsal with everyone else. So with Jerome's piece in particular, I think that was also a very tight time constraint. That was like an hour-long piece that we didn't have that long to learn. And so those files that he made for us, I'm sure they took an incredible amount of time for him to create, but they really made it possible for us to get the piece ready for that first show.
Cool.
Yeah. So actually, we have two questions. The first one's quick. Is there a recording of Wilderness?
That's a good question for Jerome.
Yeah. I don't know if there is, but we should make.
There must be something, right?
I think one of the.
It might be a live recording.
Yeah, there might be a live recording. I don't know.
Maybe, or.
But maybe soon.
Making the concert.
It's pretty good MIDI.
Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, I would just jam out to the MIDI. I think it's dope.
What's the second question, Vic?
So we got a question from Kristen Lee. Hello, Kristen Lee.
Hello, Kristen.
Can you tell us your process of how you choose the composers to work with? Where do you find them and what are you looking for? I think this is something that we're going to touch on a little bit later, but maybe we could talk about it right now. That's fine, right? Yeah. Does somebody want to start with that? Or do you want me to jump in?
I want you to jump in.
Okay, cool. I'm already in, so I'll start it. So I think actually a lot of the composers that we work with now are composers that we've known for a really long time. And so like one of the big pieces that we are planning to premiere this season is a piece by Andy Akiho, a long evening length work called Seven Pillars. And Andy's a composer that we've known for a really long time. He's also a percussionist. We went to school with him. And I think we were instantly really drawn to his music. I'm using Andy as an example, but any composer that we are excited about working with, it's because that we're really excited about the music that they're writing. It doesn't always have to be percussion music. A good friend of ours, David Kroll, who was featured on our first album that we released like a month ago, some of the first music I heard of his was not percussion music. He plays electric guitar and saxophone. And we all listened to his music. Just, I don't know, I used to listen to his music like driving to the studio, and I just loved it, you know? Saxophone music, his electric guitar. He plays this amazing band called Empyrean Atlas, and we were just really drawn to the music that he was writing. And then Ian had organized a consortium for a marimba solo that we were all a part of. That piece is called Celestial Sphere. And I think little bit by little bit, David started writing a lot of percussion music because we were all really excited about the music that he was writing. So I think it's a little bit of conveniency, just knowing composers from school. I think a lot of the composers' music that we play now, actually, I played a lot of the music when I was in school just for like New Music New Haven concerts and orchestra concerts and things like that. They were required to write pieces like we were required as percussionists to learn pieces. And they were writing pieces a lot of the times for mixed ensembles that had percussion in them. And it was just a very natural way to work with them, to learn their music, and to become friends with them. So it's been a very organic process, I think, for us, meeting composers and working with composers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that we really have a science to it. Like, I think we rely on our friends. Like, we look at other ensembles that we really look up to, and we check out the pieces that they're commissioning, the composers that they're working with. And when we hear something like so Victor was talking about this thing with David, he heard a piece that David wrote for saxophones that he loved, and he loved it so much that he arranged it for us to play it. And then that led to us commissioning David to write a piece for us. So if we hear a thing that we really like, we then start a conversation with that composer. I mean, I think we like to think about it in terms of these sort of long-term partnerships that exist over even multiple pieces in many years. So when we commission someone, it's not usually a quick decision. It's like it's taken a lot of thought and time and getting to know this person and their art before we make that choice. But also we kind of have plans to not just play this one piece, but then build on the experience of working together on that one piece for the next piece, whatever that happens to be. And I think we really like there are a couple folks like that in our lives right now that we have worked on over several projects over a number of years. And we sort of like to track the trajectory of what we've done as an ensemble, how their writing has evolved over those years through all of these different projects that we've worked on. I think one thing that we were really excited about with this composition reading, and one of the reasons why we're definitely excited about doing it once we're allowed to get together again, is it did give us the opportunity to get to know a whole bunch of composers, even in just a little way for right now, but get to know a whole bunch of composers that we might not have occasion to meet in any other way. Because I think it is easy for us to get kind of stuck in our little bubble here with the community of people that we have. And I think we're trying as much as we can to expand that community and get to know more folks as much as we can.
Yeah, it's true. This goes a little bit to what we were speaking about earlier with this time in general having its benefits in a way, because I wish for every person we commissioned, it was because I had scoured every possible option and selected this as the best for all the reasons. But a lot of times it does have to do with just kind of the options that are right around you. Not that I have any qualms with that. I really love everyone we've collaborated with. But it's nice to take some time to really kind of survey the field and see what else is there. Because there's so much amazing music out there. It's like, I know we're never going to get to commission every piece I wish we could commission, which is a little sad, but it's also, I think, a good opportunity for other ensembles to get out there and do the same thing.
I was just going to also say that I think, for better or for worse, because we're a percussion quartet, there's a bunch of stuff that we have to think about that aren't just the artistry parts of that. Like, obviously, the four of us spend a lot of time listening to tons of music and kind of trying to find new composers who we haven't quite discovered yet. But the reality is that sometimes we have to find a 7-minute piece that uses this instrumentation. And sometimes that's just like, that's the motivating factor for deciding what piece we're going to play. Maybe not the composer we're going to work with, but when we're kind of putting together programs, that logistical question is actually, I don't think it's the main motivator, but it's a big factor in kind of how we decide things, for sure, I would say.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I wanted to bring up this one other question from Alvin, if we feel okay about that.
Yeah.
Please.
This was also a little more specific about notating percussion music. For percussion that requires more than one instrument, do you have any insights on how the instruments should be represented on the staff? That's a really good question, because if you're writing for pitched instruments, it's very clear. There's a rule book on where the F should go and where the G should go. There's no rule about where the triangle needs to be or where the snare drum should be. There are some suggestions, I guess, but ultimately, when I read music, I kind of look at it from low to high and think that represents left to right to me. This is not a rule at all. But if you have a sense for the setup, I generally like it, when things to the left of the setup are low on the staff and things to the right of the setup are high on the staff. If you don't have a sense for the setup, because that's not always necessary, then, instruments generally have a low to high register. Triangle I think of as a high sound, bass drum is a low sound. You can fill in the rest. A similar representation, I think, is really helpful. You can also do the same with note heads. Changing the shapes can be really helpful for us to delineate one note versus another. But I don't know if you guys have any conflicting feelings or similar ones.
I don't know. I feel like I don't know, this happens a lot where a composer would be like, how do you want me to notate the drum set part? And I don't know if I always have maybe for drum set, there's some good general ideas, but I feel like for me, it should just be consistent. It shouldn't change halfway through the piece. That's probably the biggest thing. I feel like we're all really used to learning new keys. We learn new clefs whenever we learn a new piece. And I think that percussionists tend to be pretty fast at that because it's always different for every piece, but I don't know if I have really strong feelings about what it should be. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think there's not a definitive answer, right? Every piece, every situation is possibly going to have a slightly different answer.
Yeah.
But I feel like the important thing is, again, back to what we were saying in the beginning, that the composer has taken some amount of time considering a few different options of how this could look and finding the one that, at least to them, makes the most sense. If you look at the key and the clef that you create for your multi-percussion piece and you're confused by it, chances are the percussionist is also going to be confused by it. Don't just think that because they're a percussionist and you may not be, that they'll have this magical ability to see into your mind and understand that. So I think trying to think through how you can simplify things is helpful. if you're set up, if it consists of a couple drums and a couple metal instruments and then maybe a couple cymbals or something like that, I think all three of those different groups of instruments should have their own identity in some way. Whether that means that like the drums are on the spaces in the clef and the cymbals are on the lines in the clef. Maybe wooden sounds are circle note heads, but metal sounds are triangle note heads, or something like that. Some way to quickly tell your performer that the sound is changing on this note, where we moved from a wood block to a crash cymbal, and therefore there should be a corresponding change in the way that it's represented in the score. I think the thing that Johnny said is about the general sort of pitch level of the instrument is so important. Like, don't put the kick drum like 4 ledger lines above the staff. That just it adds a whole other level of slowing down the process between your eyes and your brain. You want a kick drum to be on the bottom because it's a low instrument, so it should be somewhere down there, whatever you decide to do with it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I think a lot of times what you just said, like, it's whatever you decide. I think that, well, I think notation software has kind of created, it has sort of attempted to create a common language for percussion notation. Like, looking through some of the scores that people sent, I think I saw like some people maybe have been using that new software Dorico, which does really, really cool things with making kits, which would be like, you know, like a multi-percussion setup. I guess they just call it a kit. But that's a really cool thing that they do where you can combine all of these non-pitched instruments together to be on one line. So you're just always reading that one line. And if you're playing on the tom-toms and then all of a sudden the wood block shows up, you don't have to like jump up to a new staff and start reading a wood block line. You just kind of stay on there. You stay on that one staff and then you have a line and you're just reading wood block then. So Dorico does a really cool thing like that with percussion notation. I think a lot of percussion notation has kind of come out of like a drum set sort of tradition where we just kind of have kick drum on the low line or the low space, snare drum in the middle, hi-hat on the top. So I think generally if you kind of more or less, we're not going to get too nitty gritty with like specifics with percussion notation. I think if you have a really specific percussion question about notation, then you can maybe just ask a percussionist because if it's very specific, you know. But like for instance, sometimes.
Do you mean it's literally one line and it'll be like snare drum and then it'll just change and be like, now it's wood block and it's still the same line?
No, I think he means a staff.
A staff. Oh, okay. That would really annoy me.
One staff, not like 3 or 4 staffs going down.
Now it's wood block. Now it's snare drum.
Exactly.
No, we just go to one line.
Or two, like that. I think that is, you know, that's still a thing. There should definitely be different lines for different instruments. Yeah.
Right. That's true. Yeah. But like, for instance, sometimes I would see, like I saw one time, I forget what piece it was that we were playing, but I was playing kick drum and it was notated kind of in the lower part of the staff, which is great. But then it was actually notated with an X.
So-called Laws of Nature has an X, I think, actually.
What's that?
The Lang has an X for the kick drum, I think.
Oh, does it?
Yeah. Well, because there's like Lang is weird because of toms and pipes. There's like all those things, but then it's an X at the bottom.
But like X feels like foot of the hi-hat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
So like that's my point, like coming out of this sort of drum set tradition, you know, like we have just kind of adapted this drum set notation because we all sort of like when we were young percussionists, that's kind of like what that was our entry level to reading non-pitched percussion, was reading drum set notation. So if you're a composer and you're not sure, I think maybe just like studying a couple like drum set jazz charts and looking into seeing how they notate those things, that's like at least a good place to start, I think.
And if you ever have a question, just ask the percussionist who's playing your piece. I mean, make them a part of the process when you decide how you're gonna write it down. Maybe before we go on, we can just grab this other question that came in a few minutes ago from BPENC. Any thoughts or ideas on non-traditional notation? I think your imagination is great. Like as creative as you want to be about how to notate something is super helpful. And sometimes the clearest ways to explain something are in a non-traditional way. I think it all comes down to how you explain it, what kind of key you give in the beginning of the score, or other creative ways that you come up with to explain what you're trying to say. Like I can think of a few examples of folks who, you know, invented new ways of playing, let's say a vibraphone. Let's say instead of hitting, you take your mallet and you like rub the mallet back and forth on a bar or something like that, and they notate it with a Z or something like that on the note stem. But then in addition to the score, they also included links to YouTube videos where they're sitting there in front of a vibraphone and they literally go, okay, when you see the Z, do this. And then they do the technique in front of you. And you've just saved the performer like hours of time thinking about and considering all the different things that you could have meant with the one sentence that you wrote, whereas making a 4-second video of it explained it so much more clearly. I mean, we're so lucky because most of the composers whose work that we're playing are alive, and we can call or email them and ask them for clarification about something. So take advantage of that. Like, be as available to your performers as you can be to answer any of these questions.
Yeah, I think it's just to jump in on that, I think it's a great question. And I think that just to think of an example, a good friend of ours plays in a percussion quartet, So Percussion, Jason Truding. And he writes a lot of music, at least in the early stages, he writes a lot of music that uses text and assigns different rhythmic values for different consonants and vowels and different words. And he uses numbers in different rhythmic ways. And he composes these, he composes pieces using words, numbers, and different formulas that he creates on his own, using these different words and numbers. And a lot of times I remember him saying like his first pieces were written just on napkins, just little ideas that he would have. A perfect example is Extremes, piece that we play a lot by him, where there's just a whole hocket that we do on this bass drum that uses different consonants and vowels from city names. And that is a really interesting way to read music and to learn music, because I think it allows us to kind of think about rhythmic music in a different way as well, where I think that's a good place to start. And I think that Jason has now started to actually notate some of his music just to keep it in more kind of traditional branding way. But I know a lot of those pieces start by just coming up with different ideas using words, using text and numbers for different rhythms.
Ian, didn't you say you played or you saw
right. Yeah.
like rhythmic notated music for Extremes?
Yeah, well, so a long time ago, even before Sandbox was a thing, I was subbing with So Percussion for a couple of concerts when Jason was actually having his first daughter. And they, I think, had only been playing Extremes for not that long. And Jason was trying to teach it to me really, really quickly because there was not time. They didn't want to rehearse Extremes with me, obviously, because they knew how to play it amazingly well. I was just a sub. I just had to learn it. And so he starts talking to me about like Denver and Helena and these cities and like consonants and playing these other rhythms based on what the letters were. And he's like, okay, got it. And then they like played the piece. And I was like, no, I do not got it. So he actually wrote out the whole part for me to read in those rehearsals. And it was amazing actually how much more challenging or how complicated reading that music in the traditional way was, because it's not how the music was conceived, and it's not actually what a performer should be thinking about while they're trying to execute that. So the result of what Victor just said, you have 4 people that are thinking through these series of letters. Depending if the letter is a vowel or a consonant, you play on one instrument or another instrument, and you play an eighth note or a dotted eighth note. And you have a quarter note kind of going on top of this the entire time. And if you were trying to read the notation in the traditional way, trying to keep track of the very dense hocket between the 4 people, it's actually much more challenging to play than if you just sort of are very comfortable in the new notation, the cities and the consonant vowel thing, and sort of commit to executing that. Then the hocket kind of happens in this amazing way. that it's just not possible if it's all written out. So I tried it with it all written out, and it really didn't work. And so I just had to take the time to learn this new way of reading music, and then I could play the piece fine. There was just that little bit of learning curve where I had to figure out this vowel consonant thing.
Yeah, I think a lot of that he got into was coming from learning music by rote, and just sort of developing a shorthand for yourself to be able to memorize something and learn something really quick.
We're losing a little bit of Victor over there. It's okay.
Is that happening for you guys too?
Yeah.
Oh no.
Oh no.
Well,
Oh, he's still going.
Oh,
I'm
no.
gonna mute him for a quick second. Let that get back to normal.
All right,
I
Victor.
think text has been a good way to do that.
No.
We do have another question, by the way, that I think we looked past.
Where'd he go? Well, in the meantime, while he's not here, we do have another question that we did look past.
Can you hear me?
That one. Here, Johnny, do you want to go ahead?
Is it the one on our sheet here?
No. Oh no. Here. So it's this one from Jude. So Jude asks, how do you see the relationship between the composer and the performer? How would you say the ensemble, in this case Sandbox, influences the final product of the collaboration?
That's a good question.
Yeah. I mean, am I interrupting you, Johnny? Sorry.
No, go for it.
Okay. I think we would always like to feel like we're kind of a part of that process. And when we work with composers, I think they come to us in various stages of their piece, right? Like sometimes composers come to us with like a totally finished thing, like it's done. And sometimes composers come to us and they're like, I have an idea for an idea of a piece, and they don't like have really anything yet. And I think that we are pretty psyched about both of those things. Like we generally, I think, want to be a part of the process. Sometimes that means like helping them develop what instruments are going to be in the piece, and sometimes that just means like helping them figure out the type of sticks or the type of sounds or the best way to get whatever character they're looking for. I think it's like it can be a pretty big range of things, right? Like just kind of based on what we've kind of had before. I would say my personal preference would be like it's more fun for us if we are feeling like kind of involved as a group in whatever process that is. I don't know, but I think it's different for every composer too. Yeah.
Yeah, this is kind of why in the with this reading session that we will eventually do, what we really want is not just to play the pieces down and be like, okay, that was that. We would love if the composer could Skype in with us so that there is a little bit of a back and forth. It's such a luxury that most of the music we play is by living composers. But I think it is important to take into account if you're lucky enough, you'll have music as a composer that gets played when you're not around, whether it's just across the world or it's in a couple hundred years. And to think about what will you represent in that piece? Like, what will you be handing over, and then basically be comfortable saying, okay, and now I'm out of it. And that's an interesting question too, is sometimes we'll play pieces in that type of scenario where we wonder, like, how much of the piece is like, is there a perfect version that cannot be messed with, and how much of the piece demands something of ourselves, something of our own interpretation. And I think it's different from piece to piece. There's certainly things we play where it's like, just execute what is written. It has nothing to do with our own kind of rubato or voicing decisions. And that can be really fun to do just because like you can remove yourself from it completely. But there's also something to be said for pieces that do leave a little room for how you want to shape the piece or be expressive with it. I think string quartets have this conversation all the time.
Yeah.
Pieces.
It makes me think a little bit about like the kinds of things we were thinking about when we were learning third construction. you know, like just like Cage isn't really able to be in the room with us. So like what parts of this are non-negotiable? Because the score is not actually so entirely descriptive in terms of like character and phrasing. Like it's there, but it's not all totally obvious. There is some kind of wiggle room, you know. That's cool. Jerome just threw into the mix here that he feels like an ensemble is a huge influence on the final product. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, go ahead, Terry.
No, you got it.
Well, just that, I think what Jerome was just saying, I think that kind of collab, I mean, what Terry and Johnny said, right? We've experienced both sides of this. Like, I think we even got a piece maybe a week or two ago that we're going to premiere next season. We're very excited about, but we didn't actually have any input on the actual writing of the piece, and that's totally cool. I think more often than not, we end up trying to be connected in a little bit more of a direct way in the creation of the piece. And that's because, you know, we're really excited about getting pieces that in some way play to the strengths and the weaknesses that the four of us have as players and the identity that our ensemble has. Like we want to be playing pieces that make us sound good, right? We also want to be playing pieces that stretch us in interesting ways. Like it's helpful to find composers, and I think we've done this in several occasions, found composers who wrote types of works that ask the performers to do things that we often are not asked to do. And so we seek that out to help us grow in some way. But it's just more fun for us to be connected to the composition process of the piece and getting to spend time with a composer while they're writing and sort of seeing every little step of the composition process as it happens. It's really enjoyable for us. And I think it results in a piece that we feel very connected to, and a piece that we will probably continue playing for the rest of our lives, just because it's a piece that we had a hand in helping make happen in one way or another, and it's a part of our ensemble, just like the four of us are, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting. It makes me think a little bit about like you know, like for example, Chris's piece, like he's been to the studio a bunch of times to like kind of hear new sounds, you know. Like I don't know, like I guess if you're writing like for really traditional instruments, then it's you can probably hear everything that you're going to write for like kind of in your ear. But in some cases, like when composers are like, you know, they're trying to come up with sounds that have never been heard before, like the sound of that glocken bode combined with that vibraphone, or you know, whatever. If you're really like if you're interested in inventing a sound that's never been heard before, I think that we're always psyched to be a part of that, you know, process about finding that, making it kind of happen. You know, we get to like actually be a part of it.
Yeah, it's part of our, I don't know, I feel like part of our calling as an ensemble is that we see so much great percussion music, but we also see this potential for seemingly unlimited other sounds, dynamics, pitch collections, you know, timbres. It's just like still feels wide open. So we want to be a part of the commissioning process to help create what isn't there yet.
Awesome. Should we move on? What's our next question here?
Well, how about this one that we also kind of blew by? So this question came from Josh, who's one of the composers who sent us a piece last week. How do you all feel about a score that does not specify the type of percussion instrument? For example, what if the score only named the instrument as low drum? Would this make you less likely to perform the piece?
I feel like it, in some ways, it almost makes us more likely to perform a piece from time to time. That, as Terry was saying, sometimes there are logistical concerns with concerts. And if you have some instruments that you have to have at a performance, and there's a piece that is a little bit looser, a little bit more open in its instrumentation, we can give it a shot and say, hey, what if we play that open instrumentation piece, or at least looser instrumentation piece, inside this setup, and let's just see what it sounds like. And a lot of times, if the piece was written with that in mind, it totally works. And so we've actually experimented a lot with doing that sort of thing, and it leads us to sometimes program pieces more so that have that kind of more open-ended thing. The one concern would be like, is it open-ended out of laziness, or is it open-ended for like a genuine creative excitement? And I think, you know, I trust the composer to make that decision, because they do think it has the, you know, what is there is enough to make the piece interesting, and then the timbres, they trust us to figure out what will work. That's just my opinion, you know.
I think it's tricky. Like as a composer, it's hard to know how specific should I be. Like I think I know what I want to hear, but I don't want to demand that it's an 18-inch tom-tom with this type of head and with this mallet. You know, like it's hard because like, you know, you might know exactly what you want, and you want to show the performers that you like really thought about it, but then you also don't want to like kind of prevent someone from being able to do it. I think there is kind of an answer somewhere in the middle, you know.
Yeah, and I think the important thing to remember is, I mean, one of the vital parts of playing any piece that makes us different than Third Coast, than So, and makes them different in their own way, is our instrument collections are different. So even if the composer does specifically say 18-inch tom-tom here and, you know, 14-inch crash cymbal here or whatever, it is going to sound completely different between two groups, depending on what instruments they have, what kind of sticks they have, and how they execute the playing of that part. And so I think if a composer wants to be less specific in certain ways, I think that is cool, because it invites the performer to put even more of their own stamp of their personal sort of playing on the interpretation of that piece. I feel like we keep talking about the same people, but we do that just because they're our friends and the people that we hang out with. Thomas Koch, the composer we had mentioned earlier, one of the earlier pieces that he wrote for us, this piece called Part and Parcel, is extremely open in the instrumentation. I think he says stuff like, you know, everyone has glass instruments and a wood instrument and one pitched metal instrument and one unpitched metal instrument, all of these different categories. And we created a version of it that we play. And usually when we play it, we kind of stick to that and it sounds like one thing. But we've heard other people play it, and we did it once at our summer seminar with a group of the students there. And we kind of made it our mission to choose as different instruments as we could to see what kind of different soundscapes that piece could support. And I think the fact that he was pretty open-ended about what the instrumentation could be in that piece means that you could get many different types of interpretations, types of sounds for what that piece could be, which I think is an awesome thing. Anybody else want to jump in on that one? You want to move on?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah,
Oh.
Victor back.
Sorry, man.
Zoom and Victor do not go along.
I don't know what's going on here.
We got you back now, though.
It's hard.
That's
Your whole
good.
life is going to be on Zoom right now. Got to figure this out.
I know. I'm
Okay.
not thrilled.
I think the next question I see is, what is the acceptable amount of measures to use when changing instruments? I've always been worried that I don't give the percussionist enough time to switch, and that came from Mariana.
Good question.
Yeah,
I'm so glad she's even thinking about that. The fact that that's even on her mind means she's already a step ahead.
Yeah. Well, we can't give an exact number of measures because it depends on the context. It depends on the tempo of the piece. It depends what you're going from and what you're going to, and it depends on what mallets you're holding, right? So if you're going from marimba to vibraphone, and they're right next to each other, you probably don't need that much time. You could do that very quickly, and those instruments could be set up like kind of nested this way. They could be stacked this way, kind of depending on the performer, what they prefer in that moment. But if there are two instruments that need completely different sticks to play, like if you're playing, I don't know, a 4-mallet chord on the vibraphone, and then immediately in the next beat, you have to play a triangle note, that's not going to work so well. So either the performer would have to hold 5 mallets, which is possible. They could stick a triangle beater somewhere there maybe, but it's going to affect how challenging the vibraphone writing can be before. They could play the triangle with a vibraphone stick, which probably wouldn't sound that good or be that loud, but it might work. It just depends on all these things. And I think you just have to try it. You have to try whatever you are doing like I would say write the perfect version of it, write the version of it where you're not considering the logistics at all, and then show it to a percussionist or try to mime through what you think it would take to execute that. And then if it doesn't work, maybe a percussionist can help figure out the easiest possible way for you to edit slightly what you wrote to make it possible, but without changing the effect of the sound of the section.
Yeah, I think as a composer, you just got to try it. You got to like figure out a way to fake through whatever that is, you know. And if you're not sure, probably just add on, you know. But if you as the not percussionist, if you can like pull off the switch, you know, your couch can be a fake vibraphone, and you got to switch over to the tom-toms, which can be the chair in the corner of your room. Like if you can do it, then probably a percussionist can do it. So I think it's like a solid rule of thumb, you know. Sorry, we were giggling about extra mallets, Ian.
Don't write for 5 mallets. No, I'm just kidding. It's okay.
I'm reminded of, do you remember in Viet's concerto, we're playing like drum setty type stuff with sticks, and then at the end we have to switch over
up the roots.
And for the premiere, we were all positive that it wasn't enough time, and Viet actually added like 2 beats into the score. And then for some reason in another version of the piece, we were like, actually, we can do that. Like there's something about time and comfort with a piece, no matter what, that it's like, maybe the premiere, it's not going to work, but like.
Well, this is a good point. I mean, I don't know if there are any percussionists on the stream right now, or just composers, but for composers too, if somebody tells you, if you're a composer, if someone tells you that what you wrote was impossible, or if you're a percussionist, if you're a performer and you're about to tell someone that's impossible, just stop for a second and make sure that what you're actually saying is true. Is it actually impossible, or is it very difficult and it's going to require a certain amount of practicing on your end to figure out? If it's the latter, well, then the next question, I guess you have this conversation with the composer. Is it worth me spending this amount of time on it? Or is there a slightly simpler way of writing what you did? Like maybe instead of it being septuplets right there that are divided in weird ways or whatever, we could slightly simplify the rhythmic way of notating that section to make it easier for the player to understand, and the actual oral result for the audience wouldn't change at all, right? So all of these things are possible, but I think too often, I think I was definitely guilty of this for a long time, you try to sight read something, you can't do it, you tell the composer it's impossible, and then what do they take away from that? They take away, okay, I have to make this easier, right? I have to simplify this, otherwise no one's gonna play my music. And that's not going to allow our art form, our repertoire to grow in the way that we all want it to. We want people to be dreaming up new ways to play instruments. And often those ways of playing those instruments were impossible to the first people who played them, right? It can take a long time. It can take a generation of players until something that was impossible when it was first written is now very playable. I mean, there are pieces that when I was in college, I spent an entire semester learning that like high school students are learning now in like a month, you know, that's just how things go. And so I think we all need to be very careful about that point of view, but it's really a two-way street. Like the performer has to agree not to say something is impossible if it's not impossible. And the composer has to be willing to work with a performer to perhaps simplify things if there's an easy way to do that. Everyone should be on the same page, right? Everyone wants the piece to come off in the best possible light. Everyone wants what the composer is trying to say with the piece, what the performer is trying to say with the piece. Everybody wants that communication to happen as smoothly as possible in performance. So no one wants the performer to go up there and look dumb, right? So as long as everyone's on the same page there, I think it's possible to find a solution that works.
Yeah, it's true. We were lucky that Viet was super cool. He was like, okay, like we'll do it this way for the premiere. And then we were also like, we'll keep working at it. Like we don't want to drop any sticks in the premiere. And then like eventually we got to the right place. So exactly what Ian was saying, I think is spot on.
Yeah. It's probably good to generally avoid saying things are impossible.
Yeah.
if history has shown us anything, you know.
That's true.
Well, cool.
Okay.
Sensing a pivot.
Okay, so I think our next one is, what are the most enjoyable and effective techniques percussionists favor over others, such as on mallet percussion instruments? Well, I mean, for composers who don't know, there are a variety of techniques, especially four mallet techniques that different performers use to execute on mallet percussion instruments, or on any instruments actually. I don't think as the composer you necessarily need to have like a in-depth knowledge of the differences between those. Like everyone kind of has a way of doing it that works for themselves. Maybe what I would say though, because like learning how to play with four mallets is like it's kind of a big thing. I don't think every composer should learn how to do that, but I think there's kind of a middle ground that can help you. Like I know this composer that is not a percussionist. I don't think he can play at all, but when he's writing a piece for four mallets, it's going to be a four mallet piece. He takes pencils. I don't think I have any pencils here, but he'll put two pencils in his hands, kind of approximating the way that a percussionist would hold them. And I think he knows, obviously, that's not the real way, but that's not the point. And then he'll sit at a piano and he'll very, very slowly kind of move his fingers around to try to understand whether or not the writing that he put down is possible. The thing with four mallet writing that people need to understand is that it's not just like a piano with four fingers. Because the mallets are sort of sticking out of your hand a bunch, you have to do all these very interesting sort of arm and elbow and wrist movements to get to different types of intervals. It depends on the size of the interval. It depends if you're playing on black keys and white keys, or both black keys, or whatever it happens to be. But I was really impressed by this composer who came up with this way to very slowly sort of sit there with these pencils on a piano and get an idea about something that might be impossible. So I definitely recommend something like that. I mean, I think really you have to live with these instruments at least a little bit. Even if you don't know how to play with four mallets, go in front of a vibraphone and try to do it, just to get a sense of what the performer is going to go through to play with you.
Yeah. Ian, have you seen Andy's cardboard cello?
No, I have not. Tell me about that.
He has like I saw in his studio a couple of years ago. He has like a, like the fingerboard for a cello, like kind of made of cardboard, where he like drew it out, and like I think he like wrote all the, where the pitches like should be ish. And honestly, I don't know this, like, but I'm pretty sure he like, he tried to figure it out, which is crazy. But like super cool.
Crazy, but it's the reason why his cello pieces are idiomatic. It's the reason why they're hard. They're really challenging for cellists, but they're not impossible.
Yeah. Yeah.
That always reminds me. I always think of that story that Josh Quillen from So tells about the Steve Mackey piece that he wrote for So Percussion. One of those movements is for these microtonal steel pans that Josh plays, which is a very obscure instrument. Not too many people know how to play them. And as Steve was writing this, I think he like took cardboard, he traced the steel drums, and then he drew in the piece of cardboard where each note was, and then he set them up in his bedroom or something like that as he was writing, so he could very slowly, like one note at a time, hit each note and just make sure that idiomatically it was going to work out. And Josh talks about this time when he called Steve and he was like, "Hey man, measure 60 is impossible. Like we got to do something there." And Steve's like, "Oh, no. If you just like play the D flat and the C both with your right hand, and then you bring your left hand over for the next note, it works." And Josh was like, "Oh shit." Like that's it. But I think that, I mean, what we're talking about is an intense amount of time. Obviously, it's a big time commitment for a composer to do that, but I can't overemphasize the difference it makes to a performer to know that a composer has put that amount of effort. It inspires the performer to match that effort as much as they possibly can with their own practicing.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, I just wanted to jump in on that.
Yeah,
because I haven't said anything for a while. I think that yeah, I agree. I think that I think for a composer, not leaving anything up to chance is usually a really good place to put your mind in. I think that I was thinking about this, about the question prior, about how quickly you can get to instruments. I feel like for me, like we were touching on this a little bit then, but things like turning pages, switching mallets, switching instruments. You know, these are like three things for me that are like the most stressful things in a performance. So in the spirit of a composer not leaving things up to chance, I think a lot of times we don't want to leave these sorts of logistical things up to chance, or anything up to chance. So like if we're switching mallets or something like that, a lot of times we'll do that rhythmically. So, you know, I'll put my mallets down on the end of 2, and then I'm going to pick up the sticks on beat 3 or something like that. Like I'm going to go in and actually write that into my music. And I think that like if Steve Mackey is going and he's like tracing a steel pan on a piece of cardboard and he's writing in stickings and like figuring things out like before he even sends it to the performer, you know, if a composer is also being like, oh, I'm not sure if they can make that stick change, well, we'll just wait and see. You could actually try and be like, you could even write in the score, like, you know, you could put in a little asaya or whatever and be like, put mallets down on beat 2, pick up sticks on beat 3. If I saw a composer do that in a piece that I was playing, I'd be like, damn, like that's awesome, you know? And I think that kind of like thought that you put in beforehand, not leaving those things up to chance, is part of the collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, you know, in a live performance, there are so many things that are left up to chance, right? Like so many things can go wrong that nobody is expecting in a live performance. So why not take care? Like you don't want one of those things to be, I might drop my sticks there, right? There are there's millions of other things that could happen that you can't predict. Let's try to take care of the things that we can predict. And I think the composer and the performer collaborating on that, trying to get the best possible result in a performance is the only way to do it.
When I think about Mariana's question here, with effective techniques and stuff for instruments, I mean, this might be outside of exactly what they were talking about, but getting the most out of an instrument means a lot to me as a player. Like when I see that, like rather than just adding another instrument to the setup, you like had me get a new sound out of the instrument I already had. And it could be as simple as just changing the stick you're using, like a drum with a felt mallet versus with a wooden mallet, versus playing on the rim versus, you know, any number of sounds you can get out of this one instrument. I, as the performer who also has to set up those instruments, I'm usually, I look favorably upon people who are really making the most of that instrument. Now, again, maybe we've said this already, but all these rules are breakable, you know, like if you have a good reason to add, you know, I don't know, some sort of, what's that thing, the spinny cymbal that James Wood uses? It's like a $20 cymbal that you play one note on it in this like.
Oh yeah,
the last note of the Grisé sextet is just one note on the roto sound.
Oh yeah, exactly.
What is that instrument called?
I think
roto
it's called
sound.
Roto sound. It's like a cymbal where when you hit it, it spins. It's cool.
For some reason, I thought it had the word sun in the title, but I guess not. It looks like a sun.
Come up with a better name for that. That's all.
Write in the comments if you have a better name for that instrument.
I feel like we could do better.
But yeah, so like sometimes you just need an instrument that does that one thing, and it has to be part of the setup. But more often than not, if there's a way that you can manipulate something that's already there, I like that too.
Yeah, this is a good thing to talk about. Like, you know, obviously as percussionists, we have to, on some level, be cool with the idea of setting up a million things and having lots of instruments be a part of our setups. That is fine. And this is always a balancing game for us, because on the one hand, we don't want to limit a composer who's writing a piece for us by telling them, you can only have 3 tom-toms in this piece or whatever. Like, that's a pretty arbitrary thing. They might have a really compelling reason why each of us needs 1 tom-tom and we're spread out around the hall or whatever it happens to be. And you don't want to tell someone that they can't do that. Spinny Mix Spin Face. I think that is a much better name. We're going to call it Spinny Mix Spin Face moving forward. But so anyway, it's
pizza cutter symbol.
Yeah, that's a good one.
The delay between YouTube and us is not helpful right now. What was I talking about? I was talking about So yeah, we don't want to encourage people not to use the instruments that they want to, but on the same side, like, we are a touring ensemble, right? Every concert we play, we have to figure out how to either bring or find or rent the instruments that we need for that concert. And I would be lying to you if I told you that discussions about practicability, right? So how, that's not a word, practicality is the word I was looking for, and how easy logistically it would be to set up a piece. I would be lying if I said it didn't come into the conversation when we're programming concerts, when we're literally deciding what art to put on stage versus what other art. And we sometimes, just based on the budget of a venue or the whatever other concerns the venue has, we're only able to do certain pieces. And there are certain pieces in our repertoire, like a piece for 4 triangles or something like that, or a piece for wine glasses, that we are able to play much more than other pieces because the equipment needs are so light. And so I think kind of take that for whatever it's worth. Like, don't stop yourself from being inspired to write whatever you want to write. If you have this amazing idea for a huge setup quartet, that sounds really cool and you should do that. If you also have a really great idea for a piece for 4 hi-hats, that sounds really great too. And if you can do something interesting with 4 hi-hats, I think
it might get played a lot.
People might play it a lot more. Yeah. And that's cool too.
Actually, that's maybe Nick Hall had a question kind of pertaining to that, about availability and portability, and how it works into our programming. We haven't read that question yet, have we?
No.
Okay, so this is his question. And Nick, if you're watching, hi. I was wondering if you could talk about having pieces written or choosing rep based on instrument availability and portability, especially from your earlier years when you didn't have as many instruments as you own now. Example, it's easier to rehearse and tour a piece that uses 1 vibraphone in comparison to a whole mallet quartet.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I could point to like a number of times where we learned that lesson like kind of the hard way, where we thought like we were super psyched to play like one particular piece. And so then we like, you know, threw it in a van and drove like 15 hours to South Carolina with a crazy huge piece. And then we kind of were like, oh, this piece is awesome, but it's a ton of gear, right? And I also feel like Nick, you pointed to a thing that is totally valid, which is the answer to that question has evolved over time. Like when we first started out, I think we were playing Jason's piece Extremes a lot, and I think like pretty early on we had like a hole in a program, and we knew we had a vibraphone, and so like Vic and Johnny both wrote some music to like fit that kind of hole in the program. You know, I think we, instead of like bringing a ton of extra gear, I think the solve was to kind of use what we have to kind of make it work. You know, I think now, because like I think we were thinking about programs a little further in advance, and like the logistics and the kind of the artistry of it are kind of being thought about now, like, you know, just like a little further down the road. We normally have like figured out the solution to the gear questions, but like definitely this is a thing we were thinking about a lot, and you know, are still thinking about. I was just thinking about the trip to South Carolina with Ligety.
Oh yeah.
Like the car's like full of gongs, you know.
Good times.
Yeah. Johnny drove the whole way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
It reminded me of that reminds me of Levy Gorby.
What is that, Vic?
I said that it reminds me of Levy Gorby.
Oh, just it being a super small space.
Yeah. I think like generally we will try to prioritize the artistic desire to play something, and then ask ourselves the question, like, is it logistically feasible? But like we played this concert in this gallery in Manhattan called the Levy Gorby Gallery. We played in this showroom, and we had these sculptures all around us, and we played David Kroll's piece, which is a marimba and 2 vibraphones and a glockenspiel and a drum set, and we played Pillar 4 by Andy, and we like squeezed it all into this tiny little footprint, and it was super, you know, not ideal, but it worked, and we really wanted to play those pieces. So I think we will try to prioritize that. But if somebody's writing a piece that is really portable, that's really, really that we're really excited about, I think like, you know, that's great. We're really pumped about that. You know, like Amy Beth Kirsten wrote a triangle quartet for us that we play all the time. One, because it's a great piece and we love her music, but also two, because we can fit triangles in our backpack.
Well, it's helpful. Like we get concert opportunities when it's just not possible to bring a car full of gear and set it up and tear it down. You know, maybe we have to go play something on the radio, or even right now we have to do live stream concerts and we can't set up all our equipment. So it's definitely useful for us as an ensemble to have the whole range of these types of pieces.
Yeah.
I just want to say one other quick thing about Nick's question about like talking about our earlier years when we had a much smaller instrument collection than we do now. And it reminded me of this piece that guy Thomas wrote for us, where one movement of it is for metal instruments. It's for metal pipes, tuned decibels, finger cymbals, glockenspiel bars, all kinds of stuff like that, temple bowls. But they're only for the instruments that we literally had in our studio. Like the first thing he did was he came to our studio, he took down every single metal instrument he could find, put it in a pile in the center of the room, and just wrote them all down. And then he only wrote for those instruments. And so on the one hand, I think that perhaps makes the piece harder for other groups to play. But for us as a younger ensemble at that point, we had this amazing 10-minute piece that we could play anywhere, and we didn't have to go build or make or buy any of the instruments. We literally had everything right there. And so I think if you're thinking about writing a piece, even if it's a piece for a lot of instruments, if you're writing it for a particular person or a particular group, figuring out what they own and what they don't own and trying to see how that can interface with your compositional process, I think is helpful.
What's up, Doug?
Shout out to Doug Perry, world famous percussionist.
He's here. Marimba Monday.
Hashtag Marimba Monday. That's right. Okay, I think we have one more question, and then we're going to wrap this up. You guys have been so generous to hang out with us. So this comes from Anthony. He says, what are the group's suggestions and or opinions on some recent pieces that could serve as good teaching pieces for composition students? That is an excellent question. Thank you, Anthony.
I was wondering, I mean, we can throw them out, but maybe we should try to compile a list that we just like post somewhere for people to check out of like pieces that we think are really successful and write really well for percussion for studying and stuff.
Yeah, well, why don't we quickly recap some of the people we've talked about over the course of the stream? But I think what we'll do, if people are interested, is we'll post maybe a list of things that we think are great examples of people doing creative and interesting things with percussion, but also maybe the way that they notate things is a really creative thing. So, people we've talked about so far. We talked a lot about this guy named Thomas Koch. Thomas is a wonderful composer based out in LA. He's a pianist as well. He's in a duo called Hocket that is amazing. He's written 3 pieces for us, all of which are wonderful. There's Hammering, which is a mallet quartet, Part and Parcel, which is that sort of slightly open instrumentation piece I mentioned, and his most recent piece, not only that one, but that one and that too, which is on our album. That has the movement with all the metal instruments that I just mentioned. Anyone else?
Yeah, two composers that come to mind for me are Andy Akiho and Chris Cerrone. For 2 really different reasons, I think. Andy is a composer who we talked a little bit about earlier. He speaks a very similar language to us, and he a similar language in terms of being a percussionist. But Chris his music is sort of like a very opposite in the sense that it does things with percussion that I think we've never really heard before. It's like he has an incredible way of writing lyrically for percussion and combining sounds together to create these, to combine instruments together that create these sounds that we've never heard before. So those are 2 also that we're really excited about.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Oh.
There you
go. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Sorry, I keep doing that. I'm learning. I was just thinking about Amy, whose triangle piece we were talking about a lot. Amy's written a bunch of music for us, namely this giant piece called Quixote, which was a theatrical piece that we did over many years with Amy. So now we're very close with her. And then she wrote this piece, May the Devil Take Me, which is the amazing triangle quartet. I think it's available.
Yeah.
I don't know, we don't have like, we did a live stream video last night. We don't have like an official recording of it, but the piece rocks. I was also just thinking a little bit about the composer Alyssa Weinberg, who's written a few pieces for us, and had a super similar process where she she came to our studio and she really specifically wrote those pieces for the instruments that we had. I'm thinking of that one section with these metal jugs that Andy found for us, but Alyssa found these instruments that I don't think anyone else, I don't know, maybe it's not the best example because no one else can have these instruments. Like Andy stole them from a hotel or whatever. But anyway, Alyssa fell in love with these kind of resonant metal jugs that we have. And I think that's a cool example of somebody who we feel came and wrote this piece really specifically for us, which I think we were psyched about,
Yeah.
Who else are we talking about? David Crowell a little bit.
Yeah, so
Right.
David is he's a composer and a multi-instrumentalist. He was a member of the Philip Glass Ensemble for years, and he has a band called Empyrean Atlas that is also amazing. And yeah, so he wrote a marimba solo that a few of us were part of the consortium. Then he wrote a percussion quartet for us, also on the album. He just recently wrote another percussion quartet. I know he's also written a percussion cello piece. I think he might be doing a 2-piano, 2-percussion piece right now. He's an amazing, amazing composer.
Shout out to Kramer.
Oh, Kramer, nice.
Kramer.
Johnny, you want to throw someone out?
Yeah, well, I think we can compile a list. I mean, I love everything that's been said, but I feel like it'll be really worthwhile to have some pieces for, especially I think what's most exciting is how fast the percussion world is accumulating knowledge and writing better and better and better pieces. And I know that the way that happens is by people going back and studying what's been done. I mean, people have poured over John Cage's scores, and then they've produced more innovative work. And then people will go back and pour over those pieces. And we're just in this constant process. So I think one thing that would be really helpful is if we say these pieces do a great job of writing for percussion, check them out and figure out how you want to take it to the next step. And actually, I was wondering if we could finish up with one last question that I'm going to pose to everybody. I mentioned those next steps for percussion. What do we think they are? Where do we think it hasn't gone yet? These obviously aren't the only answers that we're going to come up with here, but what would we like to see in the future?
Okay, I'll start.
Okay.
So one thing I think that I mentioned earlier was that we often try to find composers that we think are doing something with their writing that we as percussionists are not often asked to do. And I think the thing that we all normally think about when we say that is that so much of the music that's written for percussion is hyper rhythmic, very exciting and driving writing. And that's great. We love doing that. There's a reason why percussionists are good at that. We love to do that all the time. But we think that percussion has a whole other dimension to it that is not explored quite as much. And that's the sort of more lyrical, horizontal, meditative sort of version of writing for these instruments. And so I would love to see more composers taking advantage of that and challenging percussionists to work on that. And for the percussionists in the room, I would love to see them all spending as much time developing that part of their playing as they do the sort of vertical, rhythmic, hyper driving kind of part of their playing.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more.
I think that education is a big part of what we do. We really love to teach, and I think that that's something that we've been doing a lot more of in the past few years. I think that percussion chamber music is something that is more and more younger percussionists are starting to really get involved with. And I know at our seminar at NYU, we have a lot of high school students that are also participants there. And I think that continuing to expose younger students, younger musicians, younger percussionists to chamber music, to percussion chamber music, I think is a direction that we are, as a quartet, trying to push percussion chamber music in to allow it to be more accessible to those younger students, and hopefully something that is more percussionists, older, more established percussionists are able to do as well.
Yeah, I think along those lines, one thing that comes to mind for me, and certainly, I mean, I don't disagree with anything that's been said, but the idea of these kind of pocket pieces that we could just show up with a suitcase in a park somewhere and play an hour of music or something, with small setups. I think there's so much that can be done with even just minimal resources, that the idea of really diving into that. And some of my favorite pieces are like that. I'm thinking of, there's that movement of wilderness, which we were talking about earlier, crotale birds. I think each of us only has 3 crotales, so it's 12 total, but I almost cry every time we play that music. It really,
Can we do a live stream of our interpretation of that?
Of the dance that went along
Maybe
with it.
next time.
Yeah.
Next Sunday.
We'll have to start a little later. But yeah, I think it'd be a great way for more people to see percussion and for it to just be in the world even a bit more.
Nice. Are you waiting for an answer from me?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I am generally super excited and fascinated by composers who are finding like new sounds. I think that's a thing that I've been kind of talking about a little bit. And I think when I'm psyched about a new piece, it's because this composer has almost like they've invented something that we haven't heard before. And like, you know, they're creating expressive possibility with the invention of that new sound, you know, like we have like this huge timbral range as a percussion quartet. And so I think there's so many things inside of that range that just like haven't been heard before, you know. I feel like that's I'm always excited about the composers we're working with who are kind of pushing that envelope.
Totally.
Yeah.
I just wanted to respond real quick. So Frank just wrote in. He was asking about the lyrical thing that I was just talking about, and I think what I mean by that is asking a percussionist to think more in terms of the horizontal sort of sphere of things rather than just the vertical sphere of things. Like, again, we as percussionists, we often come from this drum set background, and we're so fixated on lining things up and playing rhythms perfectly. So fixated, in fact, that I think we often lose track of why rhythms are written in the way they're written. And they're written to express something in the same way that a harmony expresses something, a rhythm expresses something. And so I love when composers sort of take us out of our comfort zone in that way. So I don't think I'm talking too much in terms of orchestration, but I'm talking more in terms of, you know, just even straight up having a melody be created by the 4 of us at once, some sort of unified horizontal line that we all have to get on the same page of. So like one example of that would be like Steve Reich's Mallet Quartet, the second movement. In that movement, all 4 of us play these sort of dense 4-note chords, but the top note of all those chords form one melody that is passed from all 4 of us. And to be honest with you, when we first learned that piece, I had no idea that was a thing. I was just like, oh, wow, these are really beautiful chords. I like playing them. This is cool. But then we had a masterclass with this percussion group from Hungary, actually. And one of the percussionists sat there at the vibraphone and he played his part and sang the entire melody that all 4 of them were supposed to be making. And it just kind of opened up this whole new doorway into this piece that I didn't know existed. And so I thought it was such an amazing way to sort of create, again, this one unified thing among all 4 people. So I love things like that. Cool.
So nice.
Are we doing this every week?
We're doing this every week. This was our first try. I hope you guys will come back. We're gonna practice the technical aspects of this a little more this week. So hopefully we have less troubles next week. But it seems like YouTube was the way to go. That was a lot more reliable than Facebook, so we might stay there. But thank you so much for tuning in. Check out our Facebook and Twitter for more information about next week. I think we have some guests planned. And yeah, stay safe, stay happy, and talk to you guys soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in.
Bye.